Hello, hello everybody. Good evening or good morning. My name is Christoph Kistler. So welcome to this study of the vanguard in the 21st century. So I'm an editor of Foreign Language Press. So we are a small MLM publishing house. We have published last year Ajith's of Concepts and Methods, from which the essay we are going to discuss today is taken from. So in December, we have made a book launch to announce this compilation and present a little bit its contents. A lot of comrades expressed interest for the essays that were in this compilation. There were many questions that were asked to Comrade Ajith during this book launch, and even more than we just simply didn't have the time to answer. So after that, we had like this collective discussion during which we decided to make this call to form different local study circles that will then all study in the same time one essay from the compilation and have the opportunity to ask questions to Ajith, but also to listen what other Maoist philosophers who are not necessarily from India, also could be from the Philippines or from an imperialist country, think about that. So we had like a little bit over 40 groups that answered this call from many different places, from like South, Southeast, East Asia, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, of course, North America. So we are happy to, we were really happy to see like this dynamic, have like answers sent to us from like Bosnia, from Ireland, from the Philippines. We literally have like dozens and dozens of pages of questions, and yeah, we'll try to answer to them today. Today the discussion will be focused around the study summaries that we received and as well as the questions. This discussion will be with Comrade Ajith, with Surav Banerjee from Towards a New Dawn, with Lance Espejo from the Institute for Nationalist Studies from the Philippines. And we have JMP, who is the moderator tonight, but we also like, he will also take part to the discussion. So if you want to ask him a question, go ahead. We tried to synthesize a little bit the questions because some of them were similar. But if you have another question that we are not discussing, you have like the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. You can just ask and we'll be collecting them and try to answer to them after the discussion. So this is a webinar. You can interact at any moment by submitting those questions. Feel free to do it whenever you want, even now if you have some. There is one technical point also, is that we have Lance had some problems with his the sound of his computer, so there is two Lance in the webinar. You will see. Don't pay attention to that. That's fine. There is only one Lance, and he will just be like, you will see him from one profile, and he will be talking from another one. It's fine. Perfect. So now we will put a little video to present, to introduce the participants, and after that we'll go straight to the discussion. Enjoy. Thank you.
K. Murali, also known as Comrade Ajith, is an Indian revolutionary adhering to Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. His political work, which upholds the politics of Naxalbari, can be traced to the 1970s, when he rejected the revisionist politics of the Communist Party of India, Marxist. In 1976, while he was an organizer in a rural area, he was arrested for an alleged attack on a police station and was detained for 2 years during the state's fascist emergency. In the years following his release, he played an important role in writing on ideological issues on political economy, Dalit studies, Maoism, and the situation in the international communist movement. His work in those years contributed to the unification of Maoist forces in India. Arrested again in 2015, accused of being associated with the CPI Maoist, he is currently out on bail awaiting trial. While in prison, Comrade Ajith wrote many essays, some of which were published in 2020 under the title Critiquing Brahmanism. Others are included in Of Concepts and Methods, the book that we're studying today. Our panel for this study is Joshua Mufawad Paul, also known as JMP, from Toronto, Canada, where he works as contract faculty at York University. Before becoming a Maoist, he was an anarchist whose first organizational experience was in the anti-globalization movement of the late 1990s and the early 2000s. It was through reflecting on the movementist scene that he moved towards communism and then to Maoism, eventually leading him to become a supporter of the Revolutionary Communist Party, PCR, RCP, in Canada. Since 2013, JMP has written many books which aim to provide Marxism, Leninism, Maoism a level of philosophical clarity, including subjects such as organization, ideology, and economism. Also on our panel is Lance Espejo, a writer, activist, and musician who is currently the chairperson of the Institute for Nationalist Studies, a youth-led research organization in the Philippines, which aims to be a think tank of a new mass-oriented type, advancing ideas and information campaigns on social issues to ferment a national consciousness for the interest of the people. He is currently finishing his master's degree in Philippine Studies and is also an instructor in the Department of Art Studies of the College of Arts and Letters at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Also joining us is Sourav Banerjee. He is currently working as an editor for Towards a New Dawn, a magazine from India that since its first issue in 2008 has been publishing theoretical analysis on the situation in India, interviews, and commentary on the global situation, and supports people's resistance internationally. Foreign Languages Press welcomes Ajith, JMP, Lance, and Sourav to the study of Ajith's essay, The 21st Century Vanguard.
So I guess, hi, everybody. I'm Joshua Mufawad Paul, and I'm moderating this discussion. That's like my main role is to moderate it. I'll be a bit of a discussant, but I'm just going to try to do the best moderation. And it's really great that, all people around the world were like reading this piece, and we have this kind of virtual way of interacting. And so, yeah, the piece we're talking about today, as you should know, was in here. This book that's published by Foreign Languages Press by Ajith. And it's a great piece because the vanguard of the 21st century, because it starts out being ostensibly about Chavismo and Chavez, but then it ends up being about way more than that. I mean, I think some of the people in my study group that I was a part of, before they started reading it, they thought it was just going to be a critique of Chavez. And they're like, why are we reading this? It's just a critique of Chavez. We want more than that. But then they're like, oh, it's actually about the mass line, about how to work in a united front, about the vanguard, right? And almost uses the discussion of Chavismo and Chavez at the very beginning kind of as an avenue into something that is much larger, right? And it has some good sharp synthesis of stuff on the united front work. And, a number of people's questions have been noticing that stuff about the united front and focusing on that and about everything. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to begin this discussion with everyone talking, and even though I said this was just ostensibly about Chavismo and Chavez and really mainly about other stuff, we're going to begin with questions about Chavismo as the way in as well, because there were questions about that people submitted. Just before I begin with that question, I should point out that we got a lot of questions and a lot that were similar, and the folks at Foreign Languages Press have done a really good job synthesizing them together. But there's probably no way we're going to be able to get through all of the questions people submitted. We'll try to do our best to cover as many as possible. But some of the ones that aren't exactly the same as others, in the process of discussing, we may come around to answering those as well because of the broad topics. So I'm going to begin with this question for everybody on the panel to discuss, and that is, being in the imperialist center, how should we respond to Chavismo? Don't everyone's, oh, I see, Ajith, you got to unmute.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Hari. No, I was saying that you would be in a better position to start off that discussion. JMP.
Yeah.
I said that you would be in a better position to start off the discussion.
Oh, I would be the better position to start off this question. Well, that's how I'm starting it off. Being in the imperialist center, how should we respond to Chavismo? I guess I'm the one that's in the imperialist center and should be asking that. That's a question that, as a moderator, I thought other people were going to discuss it. But we go on this. Oh, it's the morning for me. Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on that, and I'm not, an expert in this. Like, I remember when Chavismo was a really big thing, and as was pointed out in the article, everyone was talking about it as like 21st century socialism, or socialism for the 21st century, right? And everyone was talking about that again. In fact, even when I wrote my first book, I made a comment about how everyone was talking about socialism for the 21st century. And I was, maybe, well, why not communism for the 21st century, right? Just to push the discussion further. But it's, this term socialism in the 21st century, at least where I am in the imperialist center, it has waned, right? It's not, people aren't talking about Chavismo as much, at least in Toronto, Canada, as they used to be, say, 10 years ago, right? But the politics behind it still remain, right? This kind of like rainbow coalition, kind of reconceiving like everyone big tent socialism kind of thing is still around. And it's, people in my reading group kind of talked about, there's something about 21st century socialism now that has a kind of Jacobin energy, like the magazine Jacobin. Seems to be the kind of thing they're doing, except, different than Chavez was. And obviously with, Chavez no longer being alive, it's not as big of a deal. Like, largely when discussions happen about imperialism and Chavez here, in Canada, at least, it's more about like defending Venezuela from, imperialist intervention, which I think is like, a correct line, right? And it's obviously we don't want imperialist intervention. We always defend oppressed nations against imperialist intervention. So, I mean, and of course, it's been the perspective of those of us that are communists that, it doesn't go far enough, like Chavez's politics don't go far enough, and we should support kind of grassroots movements there, whatever. But I'm not an expert in Venezuela, so that's pretty much all I can say about how we should respond to it in imperialist centers, because largely that response has no longer been about Chavismo specifically, at least in my circles, but about defending Venezuela from imperialist intervention. And then secondly, it's been about, there's been maybe something like that 21st socialism that appears elsewhere that obviously a vanguard project, I think, should counter, but it's no longer about Chavismo. It's just about that same kind of spirit, that big tent socialism, kind of almost like a united front misconceived as a party project in and of itself, that kind of thing.
Yep. I think that, should I join? Shall I go ahead?
Yeah, go, Ajith. Yeah.
No, I think that question has a broader implication. I mean, it's not just limited to an imperialist country alone, though of course that's important in itself. And it's not just a question of phenomenon like Chavismo, which had certain progressive characteristics and all that, with reformism and all that stuff. Because even, say, for example, during the Iraq war, American aggression against Iran and the occupation of Iraq and all that, a very interesting thing one could see in India was a large mobilization in the sense of a large sympathetic outlook that was emerging among the masses quite strongly in support of Saddam against America. And even among those who knew about the reactionary character of Saddam and all that, they were quite clear that this war is unjust and Saddam has to be supported in this, in the sense that he is representing the the head of state of Iraq and all that. So, I mean, it's a question of differentiating between an imperialist country and an oppressed country. And definitely, whether you are in an imperialist country or in an oppressed country, that division remains. and one has to analyze and look at world events from that standpoint, from that division. Basic, that's a basic division in the world that's existing today, which does not mean that you support each and every act of any reactionary import dictator or whatever in every third world country, just because he has taken a stand against, or he or she has taken a stand against some imperialist power. But this differentiation is important. And going beyond that, was for example, India in its own context in South Asia is an expansionist power, has been an expansionist, still continues to do that, though it's now a bit hedged in by the growing Chinese influence in this region. So we have a lot of resistance in the neighboring countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and various other countries against Indian expansionism. And I think the task of Indian communism, the Maoists in India, as well as all the progressive forces in India, is to take a clear stand against Indian expansionism and in support of the just national sentiments and demands of the people of the neighboring countries. So this differentiation between the greater oppressor and the lesser oppressor and all that, it's a very important thing, and I think that is how one should look at the question. The critique of Shaivism and its various other aspects, that's a different matter, which has to be pursued at the ideological level without any let up. But when it comes to taking a stand on any specific development, political development, one clearly has to make the differentiation and take the stand, whichever is the oppressed, with that section. That's how I think we should look at the question. That's all.
Does anyone else on the panel, Swarov or Lance, do you have anything to say to this? Swarov.
Yeah, I think Ajith perfectly wrapped it up. Just that I think regarding Venezuela, Chavez, when he was in power, or whatever is happening now, he never actually broke off with the American ties. It was all on the very verbal level that everything was anti-American or something, because the whole economic tie-up continued with America. On the last phase, America actually sanctioned against Venezuela. But the oil and everything that Chavez practiced his monopoly upon was selling to America itself. So therefore, I think the question of supporting that we are discussing now, I think it's tactically that we need to support what Ajith was saying, that by looking who is actually oppressed and who is the oppressor, in that way we need to differentiate between these things. Otherwise, as the essay discusses and all the statistics that are available, that shows Chavez never actually broke away with the whole capitalist economy, because he was into it. That's all I can say.
I mean, his own theoretical, ideological position very clearly stated that one cannot break away.
Yeah.
That's something that's going to take place far off in the future or sometime, if it happens.
Lance, do you have anything to add to that?
I do agree on like a political level that we should support the Venezuelan people. But then I do think that as matters of ideology and political program, I do think, yeah, that history has kind of already made a decision as regards to how that entire Chavista project happened. But I do think that it's a baby step, I guess. And I think what should be supported, I agree with most points. There's side, we need to know who the oppressor is and who the oppressed are. It's really what it is. That's it for me.
Okay, I mean, I don't want to belabor the point mainly on the Chavez and Chavismo question, because there's so many other. I mean, as I even brought up at the beginning, this article is about larger issues. But maybe I think I might want to dig in just at the end to kind of finish off this discussion on Chavismo, because I mean, it's one thing to talk about, supporting a country from imperialism. And, Ajit, you brought up the notion that, look at the support for, Iraq against, it's not like people were supporting the Baathists or something like that, but, and Saurav, you're talking about, the certain ties that Venezuela has, it's, not going far enough, and, history may have run its course, but there's still, there's a bit more. Like Chavismo and Chavez is not the same as, like, say, a Baathist or something like that, right? And one of the other questions we got that is, worth like just discussing at the end is it says, some study group sent in this question. It said, considering Chavismo's popularity among the masses, as well in masses of Venezuela, as well as its historical role in raising the class consciousness of the Venezuelan poor, how do we qualify the statement that the politicization of the masses has been hampered by Chavista policies, right? I mean, there's an argument made by people I know that, study and have gone back and forth, is that there are grassroots movements that, that will rally around defending kind of Chavismo and things like that. And we saw that when, Guaido proclaimed himself the leader of Venezuela, right? And you saw that the masses did come out to, oppose Guaido's small support amongst, even though they tried to take pictures of Guaido to make it look like he had massive support, the reality was he had like very tiny support. And basically people came out to support Maduro, right? So, I mean, this question is talking about there's a certain level of popularization that, say, Saddam Hussein wouldn't have had with, the Ba'athist movement and the popular masses in Iraq. And definitely the content to Chavismo is very different than the content to, say, a reactionary leader. So how do we address that? I mean, I'm just trying to sum up the issues and the questions that we've talked about.
One little thing I just want to say here. Regarding the Venezuelan situation, the people from Venezuela can actually express it better, the contradictions what are going on there. But standing here on India, what I can see, something similar is happening in India. You see, the agents of imperialism, they have different categories. Now in India, we are having Modi, who is a very direct and aggressive agent, who is actually doing the policy of aggressive capitalist policies. So the alternative, what we have here, they are not anti-capitalist or they are not anti-imperialist. They are just softer version of them. So this populist politics behind which people are actually lining up, it is undeniable that yes, sometimes the masses are actually searching for the alternatives and they are actually upholding people who are actually serving lip service or whatever against the system. But that doesn't mean that politically that is correct. I mean, in India, we are seeing that kind of situation. The Bengal polls are very near, and we can see this kind of polarizations are happening in Bengal. People are running out of alternatives. So what they are doing, people whom I knew yesterday was speaking very radical things, now are lining behind the present CM, who is actually anti-BJP, because she is actually continuously attacking the BJP. But that doesn't mean that she is very progressive or something anti-fascist or something. She herself practices all fascist measures, just that she is anti-BJP. So I'm just trying to say that this kind of populist politics, is oppositional populism, has its own, appeal. So the question that you asked, I think, yeah, I'm trying to answer that with my experience. That's all I can say.
Should I answer?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just contextualizing from the Philippines. Well, I think that as a general principle, I think that the movements in Venezuela and the rest of the third world, where we wouldn't necessarily say that a vanguard, Marxist-Leninist, Maoist party is leading, has a strong mass movement. I really think that it means that the external conditions are such that the objective conditions are such that the people are looking for an alternative. And I think that as questions of strategy and tactics, I think that it's really the class struggle that will really expose who is who and who is for what. Like in the context of the Philippines, Duterte ran with his premise of being a socialist and all that, and it didn't take him half of his term to be exposed as an outright fascist, an appendage to imperialism, to two imperialist countries. So I think that it's something that's also mentioned in Comrade Ajith's essay, that there will be from the people, there will be those who will genuinely, try to serve the people, who will see through uh, who will see through what's going wrong and what's going right. It always happens. It's as much as we are being labeled as dogmatic for it, but it is somewhat of like a historical event that there will always be that group, or the vanguard, that does not become a vanguard by virtue of calling themselves a vanguard, but through actual painstaking class struggle and organizing. It is through that process that they become the vanguard, or the practice, and the theories, all these hodgepodge of movements, spontaneous or theories with no practice and all that, are all synthesized into the correct practice. Correct in the sense that it works. That's how we think, right? As Maoists, that the only way we could say that the strategy works, I mean, is true, is if it works. So again, we cannot impose for imperialist countries, or we can impose for any other country or Venezuela how they will do their socialism. But as I said, like, history kind of has deemed the Chavista route as not not long standing. It doesn't have that break that Mao and Lenin and Marx had already done, had already studied in their praxis. But I do think that the Chavista thing, which we will be going through the other questions, right? Is that there is material basis, and that it will be manifested in many other um, pluralistic, multiple types of activism, and all these non-vanguard, non-party based politics that's so widespread among relatively more more middle class left thinking, that is spread everywhere. But I don't think, you cannot fool the people all the time. It'll take some time, and I guess the challenge for us here is that the point is that we kind of already know what's wrong, and we kind of already know what works. So we should start sticking to that instead of, like, trying to reinvent the wheel. 'Cause we've gone as far as like Mao, we've seen how early periods of socialist construction goes on. So it's not the vanguard party principle that's the problem. It's other stuff. That's I mean.
Could I just add a point there? So, first of all, just like to clarify, yeah, definitely, as you said, you cannot compare club together Saddam and Chavez. My point in raising that Saddam issue was to point out that even in that case, precisely because it was a case of a oppressed nation being attacked by imperialism, there was a broad mobilization against that imperialist attack, and that's the basic line of division. Now, in the case of the Chavismo and the questions that has come saying that it's quite popular still, and so how do we understand that and all the mobilization on that? I think, some of the recent material that I've been reading, it points out to a growing differentiation within the Chavist camp in Venezuela, where you have a section of people at the more bottommost level of society, grassroots level, so to say, who have started mobilizing against the present Maduro leadership and all that. This is because you have to keep in mind one thing, that this Chavez was not the first in the world to come out with this sort of a anti-American position, anti-imperial general position and all that. You had so many people like that in Africa, for example, like Sekou Toure, in Nkrumah, then there was a Captain Shankara and all that, who had a very strong positions. But the point is that, and that relates to this question of politicization, the point is that, do we have that basic Maoist orientation that it's the masses who make history? The role of the vanguard is to bring that lesson to the masses, to mobilize them in that direction so that they can actually unleash that potential to make history, rather than something that is being done from top down. Even when it's a case of mobilizing the people, if it's done in a top-down manner with your bureaucratic structures, organizational structures and all that, then definitely that is going to hamper the politicization, because actual politicization of the masses can take place only with a proletarian outlook. Because that is the only outlook which has that understanding that it's the masses who really create history. So this is the whole, it's not that there was no politics at all involved or that there was no politicization at all in Venezuela under this Chavez period. There was some, definitely, but there is a limit to that. And I think that what's happening there now is quite interesting, this differentiation that is coming up. Because if that is properly led, then that has a potential of bringing out what was positive in synthesizing what was positive in that whole movement towards the actual development of a genuine vanguard and further advance in the Venezuelan revolution. Furthermore, another point that I think we should always keep in mind is that these people are quite always tied up with the national question, that they represent some sort of a national resistance, which is something that the masses really want and they really like to stand up against imperialism. So when they take up that position, regardless of what actually their content is, you have a big mobilization behind it, which leads to the other points that have been coming up under discussion, like the question of the United Front and all that, because you see that the forces that are rallied behind such persons or such ideologies or such movements are quite similar to the forces or overlapping with the forces which would come into any genuine United Front led by a Maoist vanguard against both imperialism and the local reactions. So there is a question of critically addressing these movements, ideologically struggling against them, and at the same time drawing out whatever is positive in them and drawing out whatever is favorable in them. If you go back, say for example, if you look at the question of Sun Yat-sen, in China, Sun Yat-sen till the October Revolution was under the firm belief that America and Britain would come to the assistance of the Chinese Democratic Revolution against the feudal lords and all that. And it's actually the opposite happened. And it's only the Soviet Russia under Lenin's leadership that came out to support Sun Yat-sen. And that's when he made another leap in his thinking. And he came out with this position on the land question and all that, which now the Chinese Communist Party later incorporated into the new democratic program. And very clearly said that this is a continuation of what Sun Yat-sen had put forward. There could be such a continuity in what Chavez has put forward, regardless of his erroneous understanding and his failure to break off with imperialism and all that. But that depends on differentiating and this thing, and clearly keeping in mind the necessity of winning over these other forces who are already there allied behind it, who are potentially the forces which have to come into a Maoist-led new democratic United Front. That I think is how we should understand that question. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. I want to move. Yeah, this is great. I want to move on because we're dealing just with the Chavez and Chavismo question. We have so many other questions to get to. I think just to sum up, what's a good way to move forward is everyone has spoken in their own way, kind of about how it's there's stuff that the historical revolutionary science of MLM brings to the table about things that you need to have in order to make something sustainable. And so we can see things like Chavez and that the Chavismo kind of falling into the same patterns that no matter what level of progressive politics it has. It still hasn't, it's still top down, as you pointed out. It hasn't mobilized the masses as much. I mean, I recall an old piece that was written. It was written by one of the Indian Maoist groups back in like the 70s or 80s or something. It was Chile. It was called like Chile Casablanca for revisionists. I had a friend who had the old pamphlet. I can't find it, and maybe Ajith, you'll remember. Might know what group wrote it back then. But they argued that look, it's like this. He followed. Allende followed perfectly the model of peaceful coexistence, and he did this democratic election, and he followed that. But he didn't build a vanguard force to smash all the institutions of the old power, and so that is what led to the new. And we see this kind of in Venezuela too. Like they have elections every time where people like Guaido appears to like run, and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, the structural issues that revolutionary communism brings to the table, the kind of that revolutionary stuff, is what we should really start going in to discuss. And I want to move the question forward with this and talk about move into the United Front and then maybe into the vanguard. And that's we talk about kind of United Front organizations and how should the vanguard position itself between tailism on the one hand, i.e. being absorbed by liberal groups, and commandism on the other, i.e. refusing to interact with non-antagonistic potential allies of the people's struggles. And specifically, what are the differences between United Front politics, which is, I guess, the main focus of this question, the differences between United Front politics and a rainbow coalition? I mean, maybe I'll start with Swarav to introduce us, since we ended with Ajit afterwards, and then Lance, and then Ajit.
Yeah, I think regarding the question about the United Front and Rainbow Coalition, all I can say is that the United Front is always formed on the leadership of the vanguard, with the leadership of the vanguard. And it has its structured programs. It's not just an issue-centric program that just pops upon. You see, the recent protest demonstration in America, it was very radical in its character, but the point was that a lot of groups came together. There was big things going on in Minneapolis. Everyone was thinking that maybe some big things are happening, and Paris Commune is coming up, on etc. etc. But what happened was nothing like that. I mean, a little, for a few days people were there occupying the streets, and then people returned. So I mean, the coalition didn't work because there was no leadership, there was no organizational structure, there was no programs. And I think here is where that's a practical example where things just differ. It's the vanguard actually leads the United Front, and therefore the United Front has its tactical and strategical programs, and it's yeah. I mean, I think Ajit can say more about this.
You're muted, Ajit.
No, I think that's a key point, that the United Front is led, whereas this whole concept of this rainbow coalition is an idea that it should not be led. It's coming together of various forces, broadly united on some idea or some issue, but not led. And that's supposed to be the actualization of democracy. That's not how it works, because if you don't formally have a leadership, then spontaneous leadership will emerge, which would act in a very undemocratic manner, inevitably.
Yeah, it actually negates. Sorry to interrupt, but
no, go ahead.
Yeah, it actually emerges from negating the very idea of democratic centralism. That's the main point, that we cannot have that. What we'll have, that some sort of a horizontal democracy where everyone comes, and it becomes a sort of performance. I think a JMP has written this in his book Communist Necessity, where the whole politics is more about it's issue centric. It's more about, oh, okay, some issue is there, let's go, let's do some program. It's a performance and it ends. The issue is ending because there is this reformist appeal from the system itself and it dilutes out. Yeah, sorry, you can go ahead.
You're muted again. Ajit, you're muted again.
All right, I'll keep my hands off my mouse. Yeah, I think that's a point there, and in that those questions, there was another point which had come up, which was on how we should understand this term working class. As a general consensus, 99% of exploited toilers, blind to the specific ways in which class exploitation is accompanied with, and etc. etc. But I think that I mean both things are involved. Right? The working class, when you say it, does involve all these sections who are toilers, who are workers. Now that also includes various sections of the workers working at different levels of society. Apart from that, and then other divisions of patriarchy, gender, and caste in India, various such things. But the whole point, I think, is here that when we speak about working class leadership and refute this idea that it's just an identity, the point is about the ideology, the proletarian ideology. That is what is the distinct feature that we have to pay attention to, because that's the ideology that will help us understand all these forms of oppression in their specificities as well as part of a single whole of the whole oppressive system that is existing. Because the question, as I pointed out in that essay, that you have the self-awareness, and that's spontaneous. It's not created by the organized way, that's spontaneous. They have organized on their own, and there are so many instances you can see of that. Now, but the self-awareness is related to their specific issues. However genuine it might be, and however militant they might be in expressing it or fighting for it, it is still limited to their issue. And the whole point of the proletarian ideology is to bring up this point to them, to bring light to them that this is part of a whole, that this specific oppression that they are suffering from is part of a whole systemic exploitation and oppression that is going on in the whole of society. And that has to be addressed at that level, at the whole, the level of the whole society as such. And it cannot be addressed in this specific realms of one's own identity. So it's, I mean, I think it's a matter of not Vanguard playing an active role in giving rise to the self-awareness, because self-awareness is that, it's self-awareness. So it's not something that is brought in by anybody else. But rather, the point is that of raising that level of that awareness to grasp it as part of the whole totality. It's relation to the totality and the necessity of addressing that totality of exploitation and oppression. That, I think, would be the differentiation between broad working class characterization and the whole specific thing of that ideology, proletarian ideology.
I want to, because we're moving on to kind of some of the next questions too, and that's great. But I also want to give Lance like a chance to respond to the original question about the United Front, right? Just mainly because of the experience of the Philippines in the United Front, and maybe you can speak a little bit about that before we move back after the issues that Ajith had just raised.
Okay, sure. I do agree with the points raised a while ago, but I think one thing that should be, a few things that should be emphasized, I guess, with regards to a united front is, it should be clear what its class character is. That a united, people think that the united front is based on like this collection of people on the one cause. When Surab was right that it must be led, but what kind of leadership? Organizationally, of course, it is the Vanguard Party. But if you look at the issue ideologically and politically, it really comes down to the hammer and sickle. It must be the basic alliance of the working and peasant class. Because for sure, the reason why united fronts that there are united fronts that fail, or that rainbow coalitions will remain as such, is that there is this tendency that it will be overpowered by the middle forces. But as long as that class score is in the basic masses, then there shouldn't be a problem. And how do we manifest that? And that is something that's being raised a while ago. And that really there should really be a clear political program. And a lot of the questions that will follow on, especially with how to engage with the working class movement, how do we engage with national minorities, how do we, all that stuff, it really comes down to, if you have a firm grasp on the particularities of the people you're organizing in, you have a social, you have a firm data on the class dispositions in your country or in the area, as well as a clear political program based on the objective conditions and the objective desires of the people, then issues that will come off as contradictions will be relegated as non-antagonistic, in a sense that, as JMP said, that the Philippines has an experience in organizing church workers and national minorities, like people who you wouldn't really necessarily see advancing a socialist or communist cause, unless, in certain aspects, because we relied on going back on the objective interests of the people and how these interests of these different classes are tangential and intersect with the whole interest of the proletarian class. We are able to unite them. It's the united front isn't about broadness. It's broad because the core is so deep. It's a dialectical relationship. It's not just like you're looking for organizations and people, and that's really what it is. It's not. It has to be led. It has to have a clear program, and the clear program has to come from clear principles based on past analysis. That which have we proven historically, with how, without the alliance of the working class and the peasantry, especially for the global south, a complete victory would not be possible. Even in not just the global south, even in the experience of Russia, remember, with how the 1905 revolution turned out. Without the peasantry backing the working class, they couldn't win. So that's really important in building a united front. It's not just out there for the sake of broadness, but the broadness must be accompanied with firm principles. Exactly, it's democratic centralism. That's all.
Okay, I just want to say, so we're gonna move it on. There's we've already hit like almost an hour, and there's the study questions. There's so many of them, and I guess we didn't expect it to be able to dig in so much to them. And so apologies to people if we don't be able to address them all. But at this point, we would have been moving on to like a live Q&A period, but no one has given any questions, and so we're just gonna kind of proceed with the questions that have been submitted ahead of times by the study groups and prioritize those for now. If people do want to enter some questions in the Q&A box while it's happening, or if you just want to reserve that for the next meeting, because tomorrow, maybe not all of you can meet it, but tomorrow we will be focusing primarily on the on live Q&A as well. And right now I'm just going to proceed with the questions that we have. And so, I mean, there's a lot that's been, I want to, you brought stuff about the United Front, and we started moving to kind of skirt around the issues of identity-based struggles, right? And so I want to, ask kind of a set of questions about class struggle and identity, right? That, there's been a number of questions about this in different ways from the study group. So maybe this one will help open up what a lot of people have been addressing. And that's just, the question is, how should Maoists engage with identity-based struggles? I mean, Ajith, your book kind of dealt with this as well, so it's more like bringing that up. But being specifically, right, it says, like, in other terms, how do we balance You already brought this up at the end of the last question, so I want to, get into that as well. How do we balance between the relegation of the working class as just another identity, right? And you already brought up about the 99% exploited toilers. So, with that is how should revolutionaries win over these kind of masses and identity-based struggles, right? And then also this brings us into the question of tactical differences between semi-colonial and imperialist countries. And, I'm trying to get a lot in this question to begin with. And, there's other questions about this, about like how when we deal with this, is there a problem sometimes with bringing in maybe identity politics into the revolutionary movement as well, right? So I know that's a lot there, but I'm trying to like get a lot of these kind of identity-based ones together, just because, Ajith moved into aspects of this question at the end before I reined it back towards the United Front to give Lance a chance to speak. So I want to move fully into this kind of stuff about the how do we engage fully with like identity-based struggles or identity politics. Is that so? I don't know. Maybe we'll do the same kind of speaking order because because people are thinking, and maybe switch back to go to Swarev, Ajith, and then Lance.
I think Ajith should begin in this topic.
That's fine. There you go. You've been. I guess it's been passed over to you.
All right. Look, I think that's there already in the essay that divides into two. This identity politics divides into two like everything else. And so you have on the one hand any oppressed section of society, oppressed of being of a particular, having some particular characteristic, whether it is of skin color or gender or nationality or region, whatever, language or whatever, that would naturally generate its own identity because that's how they're being identified. And if they're being oppressed, then there will be resistance to that oppression. And now that is something we should definitely unite with, because the proletariat has to stand against all forms of oppression if it's going to emancipate the whole of humanity and thereby achieve its own emancipation, liberation. So that's something that we unite with, we should unite with. And that also means that we fight against any such ideological thinking that is there within the ranks of the Maoist forces, which do not pay attention to these sort of questions or go along with it or actually practice it also. That is also seen sometimes. So we should address it and struggle against it, both outside and inside our ranks itself. But on the other hand, this whole identity politics, a politics that is focused on a specific identity, still remains within the ideological framework of that very exploitative system which is oppressing them. Because that is that system that has given them that identity, that has fixed that identity, that is using that identity to oppress them. So long as this stays within that framework, then definitely you're not going to break away completely from that oppressive setup. And that is where we have to struggle against that identity politics. There is no question of uniting with identity politics as such, in the sense that you get along with it. You have to struggle against that politics, that ideology, while you unite with the struggle of that section against their oppressor. Now they are being guided by that politics, no doubt, and that is what is propelling to them into struggle. That's one part of it. But on the other hand, as I said, there is this reformist aspect also involved in it, which would take them in an opposite direction also. So I think that's how we should deal with it in an analytical manner, dividing it into two. And the other thing that has come up in this, this whole argument that the communists represent only proletarian interests and therefore they're not able to address these sort of things. The whole question is, what exactly is this proletarian interest? It's again a thing that I've addressed in that essay, and more detailed in the final essay of that book, The Politics of Liberation. So the proletarian interest is precisely that of the liberation of the whole of humanity, because that is how the proletariat as a class can liberate itself. So there is no form of oppression or exploitation that stands outside or away from the ambit of proletarian interests. So there is no question of proletarian interests being sectarian or opposed or unable to understand a specific form of oppression. So it's by making people understanding what exactly is proletarian interest, not only by our ideological struggle and explanation of that, but actual practice, where the proletarian vanguard addresses each and every instance of oppression, of every specific type of oppression, and puts forward its own policies on that matter, and thereby brings home this lesson to the oppressed masses that it stands with all the oppressed. That, I think, is how the issue has to be dealt with. And it's actually being dealt with by various Maoist forces all around the world. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, those are some great points. And for, for Swarov and Lance, I want to like actually add something to this discussion for you to address going further, or not going further, but developing further on what Ajith is saying. And that is, the thing with identity politics and these kind of struggles, and, I really appreciate the book had that nuanced way of engaging with it, because I find that, in my context, we have kind of like these two ways of dealing with identity politics. First is this pejorative way that is like, oh, identity politics is postmodernism, bad. We can't have any of that in a pure proletarian movement. And you get this kind of really, it's almost like it becomes the word identity politics, or people's identity becomes this fear of like diluting like a pure proletarian struggle. And obviously that's, your point, your book and what you're saying points. But then the other one is that when you do sometimes try to incorporate or accommodate some of these identity-based struggles, sometimes they do end up diluting the politics of a communist movement, right? In the way that things happen, right? And so there's these kind of two, I guess one is like a more of a dogmatic way of the dogmatism, the anti-identity politics dogmatism. And then there's the kind of eclecticism where you water down like vanguard politics. And so I'm just thinking, there's the way, I think the essay itself talks about a way to kind of like synthesize this approach. But I think when I want like, Swarov and Lance, if you want, while you're dealing with this question, to kind of like maybe think about that aspect of it as well, following from Ajith's comments. You want to take a...
Will Swarov go first, or will I go first?
Yeah, either one of you. It's great. Go, Lance.
Okay. From my point of view, I think that identities, or these different types of subjects, they do have a material basis. What's wrong, I think, is that it's wrong for identity politics. I mean, identity politics is wrong because it takes identity as reified when it's not. It's this whole postmodern thing that, as you said, it's given us this whole, it's basically made things more divisive in a sense that, oh, this is me, this is a racial struggle, this is a green environmental struggle, etc., etc. But I think, and the silver lining is in that it kind of revealed to us that even identities are terrains for politics, which is something that we could exploit. What I think though is because of identity being a political terrain, so as Maoists, I think that our direction should be really not to focus on the superficial, the symptomatic, but go into a turn of really just going back to objective reality. Because we have to remember that class is not an identity, it's not a case, it's a social relation, right? So when we organize on the basis of objective desires based on objective social relations, and it's this power that, because we just want to figure out the truth so that this could all work, that it works. I mean, Lenin said facts are stubborn things, and we deal with facts. We're obsessed with trying to come out with all the data so we could take the next politically revolutionary foot forward. So with that, once we go back into that, we realize actually that, like, we realize that a lot of people who go for IDPOL, especially in my context in the Philippines, it's really a very petty bourgeoisie, or like a middle class centric kind of politics. But if you go to organize among the markets and among the urban poor, the fight that's going to make them move is wages, better social services. It's really objective things. It's not, and the way we would resolve this is that it is a contradiction, because the basis of IDPOL or identity politics is bourgeois, but I think that there is space for it to become a non-antagonistic contradiction in that while identity politics will go for the superficial understandings of these struggles, we will go to the objective reality of it and go the harder route. It's as Ajith said that in essence, if you really look at our social reality, the highest struggle is the proletarian struggle. Everyone's, except for the capitalist class and all the reactionary class, the only path for humanity forward progressively is to make the proletariat struggle win. So it's in terms of politics, the only route we have forward is really to try. It's not really to embrace everyone in IDPOL through this, but to challenge them, to challenge them, because sometimes these people, their understanding of say the communist project, etc., it's really based on really surface level understanding or just anti-communist propaganda, while others, they will understand it more once they've actually seen the basic masses, when they're removed from their shelters, especially if they're middle class. So it's through that painstaking racing and linking that we could get through with this. It's like how I imagined it is, um, if this line is if you imagine a line of the proletarian struggle, and the farthest point of that final goal is communism. We shouldn't really take it out on the masses if they're at an earlier point or in the middle point or at the starting point. The point is they're on the line. And it's our job, it's our task as Maoists, as activists, to bring them forward and advance them. And we shouldn't really take it out on them. But then again, concluding with Lenin's words, we will make concessions in terms of tactical political fights, but it's as he says that we can't make theoretical concessions. We can't make concessions based on principle. But for those aspects of tacticality in certain issues, we will allow certain space for them to for us to sort of embrace these kinds of groups. But it is our task. It's our task to eventually really raise and link the consciousness. But on another concluding point, I just want to state that there are a lot of people, there are a lot of groups who are outside of identity political groups. So if the task is really to consolidate the greatest number of people, sometimes you just really have to go and painstakingly organize the masses who have no idea what identity politics are. And especially in the global south, there's a lot more of those people than people who will disregard you for being a class determinist or whatnot. So I think that's the silver lining in all of that. It's painstaking, but it's the only way to go.
Sora, do you want to take a shot at this big issue?
Well, both of them spoke pretty much. All I can say is that taking the lesson from Mao, that regarding particularity and universality, all particular has its own universal tendencies. All I can say is that both of them have told that all this identity struggle has their own material base. I mean, no one can deny that. The synthesis that with different identities and communism or Marxist theory, it has been attempted. I mean, if we see all these radical black Marxist writings which were coming up from Africa, there's been huge attempt from Amilcar Cabral to Shankara, to just name few, who have actually attempted to synthesize the whole theory with the racial struggle. They were actually attempting to, address these questions where it was shown that the racial struggle is very much different. But they were the ones who were showing that it was the anti-imperialist struggle, it was the struggle against capitalism, against colonialism that is actually linked. So even in regards to gender, we can always refer to Kolontai. Her writings are classics. I mean, when she's writing about what's the difference between a proletarian viewpoint on the gender question with that of a bourgeois feminist, she's clearly demarcating the line that it's where things are going different. So I think the point that we are standing today on the 21st century and we are looking at the identity politics, there are two things, there are two types of views that we can do. Is one is very dogmatic view that we can say, oh, all these are very postmodern, CIA, etc., etc. And the other one is the dialectical ones, where we can understand that yes, there has been problems and there has been limitations, mistakes from the vanguard side, that we couldn't actually reach them, we couldn't understand their aspiration. That's why they are different, that's why they are staying away, that's why they are politically backward at this moment. So we must work amongst them, we must work amongst them to integrate them, because they have their own grievances, and the grievances are material. Class, this question that all time this issue comes up in the academic world, that okay, class is also some sort of identity. I don't think so. I mean, this is a weird issue, because class is something that is related to mode of production, production relation and forces of production. I mean, all other identities actually interacts with this. No identity can actually stay out of this production issues. As Lance was saying, that you go to the market, even people who are practicing it polls, if we reach them, what's their basic issues? After all, it's for the livelihood, right? So therefore, it's the objective issues that needs to be addressed. And I think that is something that opens up the question of how the vanguard can equip itself both theoretically and practically to reach to these masses who are actually practicing this kind of politics. And there will be criticism, self-criticism, and through this new synthesis can happen and new developments can take place.
Yeah, thanks, Swarab. Actually, there a question just appeared in the Q&A box connected to this topic. I want to read it, but I want us to address it really quickly so we have time in the last 20 minutes to deal with the question maybe on the mass line, so we can cover some more territory as possibly as we can. I think this question actually was, oh, and there's another question to, there's two questions here connected to our thing that maybe we can just like clarify really quickly on, so people don't, So the first one is Peter asks, as an add-on to the question on identity politics, why should we concede the reactionary framing of identity politics in Western culture war terms, or concede it to liberals who justify bourgeois nonsense through superficial diversity? Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And the second one is specifically to Ajith. It says, at some point you were saying Maoists are real feminists, not exact quote. Is this a bit different? Is this a bit different than Kollontai? I don't know. Is this a bit different than Kollontai? Is it not? This is a bit different than Kollontai. Is it not? That's what they're saying. Okay. First of all, I think just to motivate the first question, I actually think that this question about identity politics might have been covered in our discussion. Like, I feel that none of us are saying, and I think even Ajith's article, that identity politics should be thrown out, right? I mean, the term identity politics itself is a bit of a pejorative term for some people, and it is weighted and loaded. So maybe it's not worth using that term anymore, or maybe it is. That's another question of semantics. But I think we do, like, Maoism and communism has addressed like this identity stuff. Lance put it out about the kind of looking at the material aspects of the identity. I think historical materialism can address these really well, better than the reactionary framing of it. I mean, reactionary framing just calls everything negatively identity politics, right? And postmodern Marxism and all the terms that these reactionaries use now. But I think, and Swarov brought up about like the great attempts of kind of like the Black radical Marxist tradition to really talk about kind of racial capitalism and that as well, that I think brought it, but and the strongest work of that was work that came through the Marxist tradition, right? And didn't throw that question out. So that'd be my input on that. But maybe Ajith, you can address the one about Maoists being feminists, and then Swarov and Lance, you can say something quickly on that identity politics question, and then we'll move on to a question about the mass line.
Well, about this question addressed to me, I really don't remember where I said that. So I will not be speaking in that context. But I think the basic point is that what we understand by feminism. If you look at the way Mariátegui, for example, addressed the question where he spoke about bourgeois feminism, petit bourgeois feminism, and proletarian feminism, differentiating various feminist standpoints, views. So from that standpoint, I think that yes, definitely Maoists are the real feminists in the sense that Maoists represent the highest, most advanced level of proletarian ideology today. And that proletarian ideology is quite clear in its stand on the women's question as similar to other questions of social oppression that is existing in society today. So it is in that sense that, I don't remember exactly what Kollontai has said on this matter, but I think that's the thrust of what she also argued. Though I'm not exactly sure, I'll have to go and check it up again. But anyway, the essence of the matter is this, that we speak about a real feminism in the sense of a feminism that really addresses the roots of women's oppression, which surely has to come from a proletarian viewpoint. That's all. Josh, I think that's all.
That's good. Sorry, I was just looking at another question that just appeared
Okay.
in the Q&A
Yeah,
box.
there's
Something
another
came up.
question.
I think, Lance, you said in the chat that at the same time that Ajith was ending, that you'll try to answer this last question, which is about racial capitalism. And that is, in New African Black spaces in the US, the term racial capitalism has been promoted, which originated with Cedric Robinson in his book, Black Marxism. What is a Maoist position on this term, racial capitalism? Is it redundant? Is it inclusive? And you said you'll try to answer it while also answering the other stuff about identity politics. So good crack at it there.
I'll try. I'll just answer it from a sort of practical but also theoretical standpoint that again, no one is throwing identity politics out, but we just have to look at it in a more dialectical, in a more nuanced aspect. In that, it's particularly to the first question, this whole, why do we have to frame it? And why do we have to leave it to the liberals, etc.? We're not, but we have to again realize that even in our propaganda work, we're still working with political economy, that these terms are used the way they are because the dominant structures that they are used in use them in that sense. And while we are still politically trying to emerge, it's not a surprise that though the dominant conception of the term will be loaded with such usage, like the whole thing that happened in the culture wars, etc. But if you think about that question on racial capitalism and how it relates to identity politics, I think we have to look at the politics of terms. Like from a Maoist standpoint, I think that the usage of terms, the usage of labels, as I've said, they're political terrain. Politically, we have to look at how they could be advantageous to us, in how they are tools for to act as means of the masses enunciating their certain struggles that are still in line with the political program of proletarian revolution. But as for us as Maoists, like amongst ourselves, the terms can be confusing, but the point is we need to look for the terms that most accurately describe the phenomena. So it's not necessarily like we just want to throw out terms. We want the terms that best describe are the most accurate in terms of finding out what's happening in the movement, what ism is this, or so on and so on. But in terms of politics, it's really a matter of tactics of of how you deal with it. For example, feminism, even the term feminism, right? Like in a sense, yes, Maoists support the women's struggle. As Mao said, women hold up half of the sky. We have to support the women's struggle if we're going to win. But so in a sense, we are feminists, but because the word is loaded with its class baggage, we have to treat it as if it's a site of political struggle in terms of propaganda work. The more times we enunciate, the more objective view of it, and the more times that it's enunciated, that's the struggle for it, I think. So that's it on my take on those two questions.
Saurabh, do you have anything to add?
I think Lance has spoken perfectly, so there is no need for me to add on this.
Yeah, I want to add something too, specifically because of the last question, just because of like my context and having read that and bringing up Cedric Robinson. Like, I do think, like, in my mind, I think using like this conception of the term racial capitalism is useful because it highlights an aspect of the development of capitalism through through the violence of settler colonialism, the plantation system, and the rise of racism as well, that has really become part of what capitalism is and its development and the real conditions that it developed in concretely. But I think the one thing I would say is I take it's how we go about that as historical materialists. Like, how do we incorporate these insights as historical materialists? And we remember that, like, Lenin and Mao and Marx and Engels, they read a lot of philosophers that were not that didn't necessarily share their own politics, but gave them insights that they were able to scientifically sift through. Cedric Robinson, there's great stuff in that book, but I also find that Cedric Robinson is not, he's criticizing Black Marxists in that book, right? A lot of it is, and he also there's a definite kind of notion where he almost like culturalizes racial capitalism as if it's like essentially part of European culture, which I feel is a very idealist way to put it. However, other Marxist-based people have taken that term or have developed it from a different stream. So you have like Walter Rodney and Eric Williams, that they develop it where they understand it develops through the rise of like material conditions and social relations in the way that capitalism developed as it went out amongst the world, right? So they set it, so like Samir Amin does that too. They set the emergence of racism emerging like after 1492, after like this conquest of the Americas and things, as opposed to something that is essential. So I mean, what I'm trying to get at is that these are important terms, but we should also, if we're using them, we should also approach them as historical materialists and try to sift through the insights and figure out scientifically how we understand them as well. But I mean, there's still great stuff in that tradition that comes after Cedric Robinson. But I'm always, and a lot of us that read it from a historical materialist position are always kind of sifting through, is like, what is materialist, what isn't, right? And I think the Maoist tradition and even the Marxist-Leninist tradition has all these thinkers that have been engaging with this material already, right? That we can go back and read them as well, right? We don't need to read just read the kind of new stuff that comes out of the Black radical tradition in academia. We should be reading like George Jackson, all these folks that dealt with this material as revolutionaries, right? And the stuff that they put forward as well. Not that we shouldn't read the new stuff, but I mean, there is this history, and I mentioned Rodney and Eric Williams. Okay, and I think maybe what we should say now is I do want to address one last question, because we're in the last 10 minutes. We'll go a bit over, but and this is all motivation for people to come join us tomorrow too, to continue on this discussion. But I want to move on to like the topic of the mass line, right? Because there's a lot in the piece, in the essay about the mass line. And so we have a question that was sent in by one of the study groups that says, the concept of the mass line still seems to be very poorly understood by many, and there seem to be many different interpretations of the concept. Can you give a brief description of your understanding of mass line politics and how they're implemented by a cadre organization? So we'll start with Ajith again.
Well, the understanding of mass line politics is the explanation given by Mao Zedong. It's the best concise and precise explanation. From the masses to the masses. Basically, that you, gather the scattered ideas by working among the masses. And that working is not just going and listening to them, it's also engaging them in class struggle, organizing them in class struggle, because that's when a lot of ideas come up. And synthesizing them in the light of Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. Developing ideas, slogans, or whatever, taking that back again to the masses and implementing them, mobilizing them to implement them in struggle, and again synthesizing, taking the lessons of that and all that. And this method, this mass line, is something that is not only something that has to be done in relation of the vanguard with the masses, but it is also something that has to take place, to be carried out within the vanguard, in the relation between the leadership and the led, because they are also considering the position of both these sections of the vanguard. the rank and file, in a certain sense, are the masses of in relation to the leadership. And there is another very interesting essay of Mao Zedong on democratic centrism, I believe. It's a speech he made in one of the CPC conferences. I don't remember exactly, I can't give the reference exactly now, but I'm sure you can easily trace it out, where he speaks about the necessity of the leadership listening to and gathering the views and opinions and experience of the bottommost, the rank and file, because they are the people who are actually engaged in practice, who are actually involved, are there among the masses and in the physical reality, where they can actually gather a lot of things, which is not possible for the leadership. And therefore, unless this whole thing, all this information is made available or reached to the leadership cannot actually develop the proper line or the policies or slogans or whatever is required for taking the movement forward. So there again, when you see that, of course, that is done through the formal methods of reporting of the committees and all these things. But actually, that's also another implementation of the mass line there. And I think the more essential thing of this is something that I mentioned at the very beginning, that it's the masses who are the real creators of history. Having that understanding and understanding the immense potential of the masses of coming up with a lot of creative ideas, methods, and solutions to problems that come up in the movement, and having absolute faith in them. That is the actual basis of that mass line, because it's only then that you understand the necessity and the compulsion to listen to them. Otherwise, if you have an attitude that it's we who are creating the history and the masses are there to follow us, then certainly you're not going to listen to the masses or try to understand what they are saying or why they are saying something. And there, I think that in our experiences, we have seen quite a number of times that what seems to be very irrational in the opinions that they are expressing can contain a lot of rational content, but they are expressing it in their way, in their form of expression. And so it's the task of the vanguard to actually sift those opinions and understand what is the crux of it in relation to the class issues that are coming up, which is again related to the question of class analysis, of understanding which are the forces expressing which opinion, all that. I mean, all these things are sort of tied up together. So, essentially, the point is, as explained by Mao, from the masses to the masses, with the understanding that it's the masses who are the real creators of history. That's all.
Okay, we'll go to Swarev and then Lance.
Yeah, Ajit mostly answered the whole thing. That how Mao teaching that learn from the masses and teach them is the most essential part in understanding mass line. I would just like to add one thing, that the method of criticism and self-criticism is very crucial in practicing mass line. That's what keep the whole process of things going from up to down and then from down to up. That's the whole process that keeps the vanguard party to the newest height of MLM development of Marxist practice, Marxist politics that has developed to the level of MLM theory. That's the biggest contribution, is the practice of what I just said, criticism and self-criticism. Yeah.
Okay, Lance.
Okay. Yes, the concept of the mass line is in that line from the masses to the masses. It's a bit going in relation to the vanguard. They are not mutually exclusive concepts. Even Lenin in What Is to Be Done, which we always look to when we think about the vanguard party, he mentions there that in the final analysis, we need the masses to win, but you cannot let them go on alone. Therefore, you need professional revolutionaries. So this is something that's really crucial. It's akin to the least among you shall be the greatest. The reason why a party or a group becomes a vanguard, it is because it is the one that is most ingrained. It is the one that has really gone down like mud all over the knees level of organizing to the masses. And why is that? Why do we need the masses? Because Marxism teaches us that, I mean, the whole communist project is not a project that we just want because we just want it. These are based on objective social relations and social desires, and that waging a revolution is a science. That's what MLM is. It's a social science. Hence, you really need to fully understand material reality. And the only reason and the only way we could fully understand social reality is if we have bigger data. That is why we need the masses, because we ourselves, being limited as individuals or as certain groups, we cannot fully totally comprehend the next step or whatever, all the chaotic things that are happening. We need the masses. That's why the mass line is a really humbling thing, that you should never be arrogant, you should never be sectarian, as Comrade Ajith says. We should be open to the ideas of the masses, and the silver lining there is that we need to test them out. That's always what it is. We need to test it out, because even as we've studied Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, we've read all the letters, we've read all the volumes, etc., you will never fully understand it if you don't put the work in it, if you don't put the practice in it. That's why um, we need the masses, because we'll never get it right just on ourselves, because knowledge is gained through praxis, but knowledge develops dialectically. Even the most fundamentally wrong ideas like identity politics and all that, while they have their class baggage of how they are perceived, even in Lenin's on the question of dialectics, even the most far out idealist philosophies have a kernel of materialism, of material basis in them. There's a material basis why these were thought out. So as regards to theories, philosophies, political programs, organizational structure, alliance work, or how we are about to do these things, even if the masses may have incomplete ideas, that's what they are. They're incomplete. That's why it's our task to study MLM so that we don't repeat, we don't reinvent the wheel, but at the same time, we learn from the masses and they learn from us so that we advance the praxis forward, we advance the theory forward. And that is why you will really know that your mass line is working when you really have the largest people getting mobilized, because that's the dialectical, that's the irony of it all. The mass line is the sharpest line, but it's only the sharpest political line if it's the broadest line. So it's not about looking for it correct based on dogma. It's correct because it works, and it works because it works for a large number of people. That's why the mass line is so important and humbling for Marxists and Maoists and activists. I guess I'll end with that.
Okay, thanks for that. I think we're going to have to move close to wrapping up, because our time is wrapping up for today, not for next week. And I just want to say one final, I think all this stuff about the mass line you've been talking, every one of you has been saying is really great. And it is like this addition, just like kind of really thinking through that concept fully is, I think, essential, because even we can know the terms, right, from the masses to the masses. And I know a lot of people will use those terms and not actually be practicing it. They'll just say what they're doing is that, so it's a really, the way that Lance, you brought up at the end about it being this humbling experience, and, Swarab, your discussion of criticism and self-criticism that added on to Ajith's main, like a substantial definition of it are really good to keep in mind. We have one more question, which we're not going to address it today. But I think the way we should do it is we should begin by tomorrow by addressing this question in the discussion. And this is the one that the mass line automatically implies this question, and that is, what is your definition of masses? Which is a great question maybe to begin tomorrow's session with. But on there, I think we need to close up. I know I have childcare duties to get to soon, and everyone's stuff. Everyone is we said it was going to be an hour and a half. Tomorrow, you got the details from Foreign Languages Press, and I'm just going to actually hand it over to Christoph right now to close down today's event. And thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm back. So yeah, thank you everybody. That was very interesting hour and a half of discussions. As JMP was saying, we have so much more topics to discuss. Yeah, the study was recorded, so we'll be uploading it to our website right now if you want to share it with some of your comrades. Not much more to say, I think. Just join the second Q&A session tomorrow if you want. And yeah, check your time zone when it's going to be. I hope it's not in the night for you. And thank you very much. And have a good day, evening, morning, whatever. Bye.